The move to understanding gender as a cultural phenomenon as opposed to a biological phenomenon has been a major theoretical breakthrough in the study of gender, at least from the perspective of Western epistemologies. The claim, as it goes, is that gender is not something that we are, i.e., it is not something that is encoded in our hormones or our genes or our material body, but rather that gender is something that we do, something that we partake in, a set of performances that we reinforce, resecure, and reproduce in everyday life. The major question to this proposal has been, if indeed gender is produced by culture, then it goes without saying that a different cultural order has to produce a different iteration of gender, if at all. And this is where African perspectives of gender has troubled feminism and has challenged it in its presupposition of how it understands gender. Another interesting perspective from which to consider this idea of culture producing gender is to problematize plantation life and slave life in the North Americas. The proposal is this: black people who were enslaved were made into property, and as such did not, at least within slave society, acquire social conceptualization. And without social conceptualization, you cannot acquire subjectivity such as gender. Consider this, for instance. Black people could be sold in terms of contract law, they could be donated in terms of donation law, they could even be inherited in terms of succession. If a black person was killed or hurt, the question was not that of assault or of murder, but it was a question about damage to property. And the proposal will be this: if for 200 years plus the social schema of a culture is predicated on black people being property, at what point do they acquire gender? Do the same slave owners who have the right to kill them and rape them and sell them and contract with them as though they were property, do those people also develop the same kind of nature of gender that the very property that they own also develops? It's a contradiction of terms. And as such, to understand how gender developed in pre-colonial Africa, or the kind of gender nature that slave societies produce of slaves, one has to study it in its particularity, in its own historiography, paying close attention to the way in which the societal dynamics would inevitably shape and give expression to a different gender orientation and to a different embodiment of sexuality in general. And this is the great work of Oyerenko Oyewume, is to problematize and specialize in understanding local particularities that give expression to subjectivities, rather than to repeat Western dominance of thought by assuming that that specific cultural order can indeed be made to include and speak for all other kinds of cultural orders. One of the richest insights to come out of this particularized study of gender within an African society has been the revelation that, for the most part, gender categories from an African perspective are ethical rather than biological. That one acquires the responsibility, the role, the vocation, and the societal position out of an ethical conferring of the duty according to multiple sophisticated things like kinship structures and so forth, rather than one acquiring it from a biological perspective. So for instance, as a short example, if you were to look at the Bantu people who speak Setswana, they have mama, which would obviously mean mother, but they also have mamani, which is the diminutive of mother, and mama holo, which is the senioritizing of mother, meaning that one becomes a mother by order of birth and has those responsibilities not because they carried a child or have a child themselves, but because the sophisticated and intriguing kinship structures of African families inevitably confers on them that particular role.